But we went, thank you for coming to see Hershey Dwoskin. So Friday, we have
Yeah.
a few things here. Friday afternoon, the movie, it will be the book club next chapter is with Diane, Keaton, and Jane Fonda. So it'll be at 2 o'clock. They'll be here and we'll. Sorry. And on Tuesday, we have a virtual book launch by Roberta Rich, and it will be the Jazz Club Spy. It will be online on Zoom at 7 p.m. So here's Mr. Dwoskin. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, this one works. I think this was even better than the other one. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much all for coming. This is going to be the last in-person class for a while. I was just told by Angela and by cote-saint-luc that I'm going to be able to continue these classes online, meaning on Zoom, but starting in February, at the beginning of February. And the reason is because I'm leaving for the South this week, and then I'm doing a lot of traveling at the beginning of the winter. So I'll be going to South America, to Patagonia, and then after that, coming back and doing the cruises with my grandchildren. And after that, I'm going to Africa to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in January. So that's why hopefully I'll come back in one piece. And once I come back at the beginning of February, I'll be able to start teaching again on Tuesdays at 2 o'clock on Zoom, starting February the 6th. So basically that's my program. And so I want to welcome you all here for our last class. And what I thought I would do in this class is to go over a few of the more continuing issues that we've been looking at. And I thought I'd rather start with the one about some very important and frightening figures that were published this week that I read about. And that is it's talking about how the world is getting warmer. And what they published was, for the month of October was the hottest month, the hottest October ever recorded anywhere in the world. The average temperature, as I've shown over here, was 1.43 degrees Celsius warmer than the historical average. Now, this is a huge number. It's really, the world was looking at somewhere between 1.2 and 1.3 degrees Celsius was the amount that the world had been averaging over the last several years. And the hope was that we would never, when the Paris Accords were set up 20 years ago, to talk about climate change and global warming, they said was, our goal is to limit the world's increase in temperature to 1.5 degrees by 2030. I think it's, I wrote 2035, that is by 2030. So that was the goal. And what they said was, if the world gets any warmer than 1.5 degrees above average, it's going to really cause climatic catastrophes all around the world. Every month or two we hear about this enormous drought or this enormous flood. And this year, at this time, right now, of all places, Somalia, one of the poorest countries in the world, one of the countries that has suffered drought continuously over the last many, many years, is experiencing a huge flood. So it goes to show that, the same region can have both a flood and a drought, not at the same time, obviously, but at different times. Both of these events are catastrophes for the people who live there. And right now, Somalia is experiencing a huge flood. The figures that just came out that were published showed that we have 198 countries in the world that are, let's say, members of the UN. Of the 198 countries, 196 of them have had above average temperatures this year, and 2 have had below average temperatures. So the 2, in case you're curious, are Iceland and Lesotho in the bottom of South Africa. Every other country has had above average temperature. So it shows you that there's a trend going on, and this trend is not, seemingly, it's not going in a slow, steady line like this, but it's almost going like that. And that's what's so concerning and worrisome. So if the goal is to keep the world's temperature below 1.5 degrees by 2030, and if October was 1.43 already, so you can tell, by the next 7 years, it's likely that this number will be surpassed. And really, for the world itself, it's really quite worrisome. For us here in Canada and in northeastern, especially northeastern North America, the effects are less than they are in other places. But still, overall in the world, it really is something that's pretty worrisome. I was reading or looking at pictures that were published in the New York Times this week, and they unearthed a series of photographs that were taken in Greenland by a military pilot in the 1930s. And it showed, I love how they do this. They have a picture of the same glacier in the 1930s, and if you swipe your finger along, it shows what it is today. And it was just unbelievable. The change was just unreal, how much of it has disappeared from 1930 till today. It was just so clear to see as you rolled your finger across. And they had several different pictures of several different glaciers. So you could see how much they receded over the last 100-ish years, 90 odd years. In fact, Greenland, for those of you who are, we'll call them mineral bugs or investment bugs, Greenland has the greatest possibility of future mining development because so much of the glaciers have receded, showing that you've got, land underneath, and then the prospectors can just look at all that land and see, okay, what's underneath it. You don't have to drill through feet of snow and ice, because not knowing what's underneath it now, they could just look at the surface and say, oh, this looks promising, and look for valuable minerals there. Remember that in terms of the whole world, much of it has been already looked over, either by air or on foot. And if you have just a snowfield, taking a picture from the air is not going to do anything. You just see a bunch of snow. But if you have, dry land, from the air, sometimes you can see things that you don't see from being on Earth. And so Greenland is opening up. Greenland was, it still is, mostly covered by ice and snow. But the more of it that gets melted off, the more land appears. And that leads us to this, we'll call it a kind of a vicious circle of warming, because as the land gets uncovered in Greenland, the color of the land is dark, and therefore more sunlight is absorbed by the land. It's now open. Whereas before, the sun would hit all the snow on the surface and bounce back up again, something called the albedo effect. So it's kind of more sunlight reaches the earth, Greenland gets warmer, more of the glacier melts, therefore more sunlight is absorbed, and then it's like, you know what I mean, a continuous circle of melting. And of course, all that water, where does it go of all that melting? It of course ends up in the ocean, and that leads to the rise of the sea level. Now, obviously, the sea covers somewhere like 2/3 of the Earth's surface, and assuming that the sea level is the same level everywhere, which is actually not, you know, for argument's sake, it really is. That's why they call it sea level. So all that water, all the ice going into the ocean, it has to fill up a little bit everywhere around the world before the next stage can go up. So the sea level is going to rise slowly and not quickly, but it is rising at a steady rate, to the point where another interesting speech came out this week by the president of the country called Tuvalu. So it's a country that doesn't consist of much except a few islands in the Pacific Ocean. And these islands in the Pacific Ocean are not very hot. So it's projected that at a certain point, the whole country is going to end up being underwater, and the people will have to move. But what the president said was this, was very interesting. He said, you know, every country has a 200-mile exclusive economic zone, EEZ. So let's say, for example, here's an island. You get 200 miles around here. Here's another island next in the same country. You get 200 miles around here, etc., right? So these exclusive economic zones are very valuable because you have fishing rights, you have mineral exploration rights on the bottom of the ocean, you have even rights, well, mostly those, you know, fishing and other sort of exploiting of the sea for its potential. And what he said was, we are making a claim today that even if our whole country is underwater, that we want to keep this exclusive economic zone forever. Even though when you go on the ocean, it looks like nothing, because our land is all going to be underwater. Maybe a little spot here and a spot there will be above. But he said that Tuvalu is insisting that the 200-mile exclusive economic zone will remain with our country, even if our country doesn't exist anymore. That means that our people will have to move somewhere else, but we still get to keep all of that. So that it just goes to show you how far ahead some people are thinking when it comes to this whole idea of sea level rise and climate change. So where are we at now as far as that whole issue is concerned? But we know that lots of places have taken concrete steps to lower their production of greenhouse gases. And I've said before, the greenhouse gases, which consist of carbon dioxide mostly, and methane, I think methane is this, that we know how to lower them, but they're generated by electricity production, so that's the first thing. So that means in power plants, burning coal, burning natural gas, burning oil. And then there's transportation. So airplanes, cars, and the ships. So all kinds of transportation, trains. So these things burn gasoline, or they burn methane, and that puts up another bunch of, the CO2 into the atmosphere. The other four things are from an industry. So industry, especially steel, cement, and other aluminum, and other just general manufacturing, they produce a huge amount of CO2. And the last thing is farming. So farming, especially animal production, rice production, produces a huge amount of CO2 also. So a few of these things are being looked at. Cars have been changing over slowly to electric cars. Electricity production, we now have solar and wind as generators of electricity without putting in CO2. There's also a renewal finally of looking at nuclear power, which was being ignored because of the dangers in nuclear power, and also the Fukushima disaster in Japan, which closed down a nuclear plant. So the world is now starting to build more nuclear reactors. But this takes 10 or 20 years to build one, so it's a long-term investment. But even with all of this going on, with all these changes going on, the amount of CO2 being put into the atmosphere is growing and not receding. So what's the reason for that? The reason is because, first of all, the world's population is growing. So every human being, breathes out CO2 every single day. The amount of food that's needed to feed all these people produces more CO2. And especially because people are getting richer on average. So richer people, they want to have more things. In the developing world, that means they'll buy more motorcycles. Some of them are buying cars for the first time in their lives. People in India and China, the two biggest countries in the world, are getting richer. And they're starting to buy automobiles for the very first time. So it's not like you're trading in one car, like here, you trade one car in and you get another car. There, people are buying cars for the first time. Now, it's true that in China is the world leader in buying electric cars. In the sale of electric cars, manufacturing of electric cars, they're the leader. Somewhere around a third of all cars in China today are electric cars. But in the US and the rest of the world, we've just scraped over the 5% mark. Between 5 and 10% of cars in the US are now going to be electric cars. So that still leaves a lot of CO2, exhaust going up. One thing that I read today, it was known, but it was just pointed out, is that when it comes to ships are having the opposite effect on the environment. In other words, a requirement was put in a few years back to reduce pollution, to reduce atmospheric pollution. The quality of diesel fuel they burn has to be much higher than it used to be. So diesel fuel is like the lowest of the low. It's like on the bottom of the totem of fuel. And it contains a lot of extra things in diesel fuel besides burnable fuel. And the biggest additional ingredient, which is polluting, is sulfur. So diesel fuel used to contain up to 5% sulfur, And they changed the regulations now to make it only up to the 0.5% sulfur. So sulfur is a pollutant, it's an atmospheric pollutant. When it goes up in the air, it forms like sulfur dioxide, and it's a pollutant. But the thing about sulfur is that it also is something that has an effect on cooling the atmosphere, not warming it, cooling it, because the particles of sulfur that get suspended in the atmosphere reflect the sun when it comes down from the sky. It hits these particles and then bounces back up again. So the amount of sulfur in the atmosphere is a cooling effect. But because there's so much less sulfur in the ship's exhaust, then a lot more sun, of course, gets to hit the surface of the earth instead of getting pushed back up. And you could see a picture. If you looked at from outer space, when the ships go, they leave a trail of exhaust, just like a trail of exhaust from a car. But you could see it. You could actually take a picture of it, and you could see these lines going all over the world in the shipping lanes. There's loads and loads and loads of these exhaust trails. There's a lot more than you would think. And of course, because they don't have sulfur in them anymore, they don't act to cool the world off. It's not a ship, it's a plane. It's Superman. The other thing that's new, though, on the positive side, is this year they opened up the very first industrial-sized carbon capture system. So what carbon capture means is you have a machine like that one over there. It takes carbon dioxide straight from the atmosphere. And what it does is it passes the air. Now, you can't take carbon dioxide straight from the atmosphere, you've got to take all the air. And you pass the air over these plates or trays, we'll call them trays. And on the tray, they just put powdered limestone, which is the cheapest material you could possibly find. When the air passes over the limestone, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reacts with that limestone, and it becomes a kind of a new chemical. And then you can take that chemical and just take it out and change your tray, put new crushed limestone on, and the old stuff you can just pack away and make it into cement. So in other words, you freeze the carbon dioxide inside the cement that you just made. So this has always been an idea that people had, but there actually is a plant that is doing it now on an industrial scale, and they are paid by the ton of carbon dioxide that they remove from the atmosphere. So right now, they are being paid somewhere around $100 a ton, and it costs them $600 a ton to do this job. So it doesn't pay at this point. But what they say is that they can scale up the production to make it pay. And anyway, that would be certainly a direct way of reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this is a sort of step-by-step process that happens. Let me just see if something else that I didn't. Of course, you know that the environmentalists don't like this idea of carbon capture because they say that all you're doing is delay the transition from fossil fuels to something else. If somebody says, "Oh, well, the carbon dioxide problem is not so severe," then they'll dilute the amount of time it takes to transit to something else. But you know that we're starting to get, like, countries made commitments. The Western world made commitments to the UN, to to reduce their carbon dioxide. And it's one thing to make a commitment, but now you actually have to take steps to do it. And that's where all of a sudden politicians are finding opposition to it. So you heard that Prime Minister Trudeau announced that there would be no sales tax charged on fuel, on diesel fuel in Newfoundland, because that's the only thing they have to heat their homes with. And then other places have said, well, we also want this reduction in our sales tax. In Europe, in Germany, they announced a plan to ban all gas stoves and all gas heating as of a certain date. And all of the people there said, well, wait a minute, we like our gas stoves and we don't want to change to another form of heating. And it's become a kind of a crisis of practicalities. And should the politicians stand for something that their constituents don't want? And it's one thing to say, well, we want to, fix the world. And it's another thing for somebody to walk into your gas stove and put a big X on it and say, get rid of it. Now you need to get another kind of stove. So, this is where the something is hitting the fan, put it like that. The Conservatives in Canada, Conservative Party, which is likely to win the next election, they wanted to go much slower on the environment than the Liberals and NDP have. And since Alberta is such a big part of their support, they don't want to force the end of oil production in Canada. They don't want to put controls on the environmental laws that these oil companies have to follow. And it just means a kind of backward going, and not only in Canada, but in many other places when people try to kind of, force decisions on the people at large. China and India are still building coal-fired electrical generation plants, even though coal is the dirtiest fuel that there is. But it's also the cheapest for those countries that have it. But anyway, that's just a kind of a quick look at that. And we're going to go to something else. Yeah, it's, as people get richer, it's not only that they demand more cars and they travel more, but also they can afford air conditioning, which takes a lot of electricity to produce. And eating, food, eating beef and chicken and fish when before they were eating just grains means a lot more carbon dioxide produced in the farming sector. Also, we should also say that this is an El Nino year, and El Nino, is a natural phenomenon which occurs sometimes every 7 years, sometimes sooner than that. In general, it means it warms up the earth from what it normally is. And the prediction is that this El Nino is getting stronger and stronger. But oddly enough, we haven't had the effects of the normal effects of what happened in an El Nino year haven't happened yet. So people are saying, well, maybe, it's just a matter of time before the normal sort of occurrences with the El Nino before they happen. And in general, they're predicting for the southern US a much wetter winter. And El Nino usually brings a lot of rainfall to the west coast of Canada, west coast of the US, west coast of Mexico, west coast of South America. And, so that remains to be seen. So I'm going to leave this subject for now because I just want to review some different things that are going on in the world, and we'll get to our favorite one soon. The war in the Ukraine is another one. This coming February will be 2 years since that war started.
Seriously.
And while there's been great disappointment that over the summer the Ukrainians didn't push the Russians back, even though the Ukrainians received so much military equipment and military aid, they tried to push the Russians back, and the Russians held the lines pretty well everywhere. But the fact is that for Russia, the war is a bigger failure in the sense that they're the ones who invaded the Ukraine with the aim of getting rid of the country, of overthrowing the government and installing their own people in charge, and they haven't been able to do it. And it's costing the Russians huge amounts of soldiers, of deaths, of wounded, and huge amounts of money to spend on this war, which they can't use for other purposes. So it doesn't mean because the Ukraine hasn't kicked the Russians out that they're lost the war. They've managed to keep the Russians from conquering them. So it means that they win the war. I don't know if any of you saw the reporting that was on the TV this week, and I don't remember whether it was CBC or CNN or somewhere like that. But what they're showing is that the Russians are purposely trying to hit items of cultural importance for the Ukrainians. Churches, museums, other centers of culture that they are purposely bombing to break them, to kind of break the spirit of the Ukrainian people, and to, in a certain sense, prove, as Putin said, that Ukrainians are not a real people, and that Ukraine is not a real country. So if you can get rid of all of the distinctive Ukrainian cultural items of significance, then you can sort of show, well, that these people are just Russians just like us. And, they speak a slightly different language, but they don't have a right to have their own country. So, Putin doesn't show any signs of saying, okay, I've had enough, let's make a deal. And on the other hand, Ukraine says, we're not making any deals unless the Russians get out of our country completely. So you could see how a stalemate has arrived. I read something interesting yesterday. It was just in one little place that said that the Russians are preparing to retreat from the south of the Dnipro River, which is right now the boundary between the forces on two sides. And see, this is the Dnipro River here, and the city of Kherson is here. So the Russians at one point were in this whole area to the north, and they retreated to south of the river. The river ends up emptying into the Black Sea over here, and the Ukrainians apparently have actually managed to make some small landing across the river and bring some equipment over there in a very small spot. So it depends on whether this is going to continue or not, but it's forcing the Russians to bring their forces. Right now, the Russians are fighting out here with the Ukrainians to try to move this way into the Ukraine, and it's the Ukrainians that have held them off over here in that sector in the northeast. With very small exceptions over the whole summer, the Ukrainians haven't really advanced to capture hardly any territory from the Russians. It's been a 1 year of pretty well stalemate. Now, you have also heard that the US is a mess, so we're gonna go into that. And this mess that they're having is preventing the Ukrainians from getting more money to fight against the Russians. There's a large part of the Republican Party in the United States that doesn't believe that giving the Ukraine money is a good idea. There's a lot of very conservative Republicans who don't believe spending any money outside of the US is a good idea. But when it comes to the Ukraine, there is a feeling somehow among Republicans that we're just throwing good money after bad. A lot of Republicans disagree, though, but ex-President Trump, he's one of those people who says, well, we shouldn't give them any money. And it's not because they want to so-called balance the budget. Because when Trump was president, the budget was the most unbalanced to date, up until this administration. So when the Republicans are complaining about a balanced budget and say, well, we can't afford to give Ukraine any money. Well, when they were in power, they had a very unbalanced budget. So it's an excuse, really, in that way. The US is going to go through, starting this Friday, the whole crisis of funding the government is going to start all over again. And if the government is not funded, it means the government has to shut down and not pay its workers and not pay its veterans and not give out certain monies to citizens, certain types of pensions and certain types of welfare, all have to get cut off if the government doesn't receive authorization to continue borrowing money. And, this is an ongoing crisis that we've seen so many times in the past. The United States is the only country where the parliament has to vote each year to fund the government for things that it normally does. Usually when you have a vote, say in the House of Commons, the vote is for a new type of spending or different priorities. And it's not to keep the lights on in the Parliament bill. Those expenditures are automatic to how the government spends money. But in the US, Congress has the right to the obligation to approve each year's spending of the government. And if they don't approve it, it means the government can't spend any money. So this crisis is now coming to a head on Friday, and we'll see where it goes. There are people in the Republican Party who just don't believe in the government at all. So they would like to see the government shut down. And it's going to require some skillful maneuvering by the new Mr. Johnson, the new Speaker of the House of Representatives, to get some kind of spending bill through. And that also includes aid for Israel, because the Congress approved $14 billion of aid for Israel, but it hasn't been voted on by the Senate and the House of Representatives, because when the House of Representatives passed this $14 billion bill, they said it's conditional on removing $14 billion from the IRS. But to my thinking, as I've said before, if you want to raise money for the government and balance the budget, you should be giving more money to the IRS, not taking away money from the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, meaning the tax collection agency. So that's where things are standing right now. It's frozen. The U.S. government is dysfunctional because of this extreme split in jurisdiction between the Senate and the House of Senate, the House of Representatives, and the President. And all three have to agree on the exact same wording of the exact same bill in order for it to become law. And since the Republicans control the House of Representatives, the Democrats control the Senate, it looks like a kind of a, what they call a Mexican standoff, call it like that. not to disparage Mexicans at all. Um, oh yeah, the Ukraine has applied, to go back to that, to become a member of the EU. And the EU is getting to be quite accepting of this potential addition. Of course, this would send Russia into a complete tizzy because they want to pull, the Ukraine away from the European Union, but they pushed it into the arms of the European Union, just the way they pushed Sweden and Finland into the arms of NATO. So their campaign, the Russian campaign, besides conquering certain territories, hasn't really yielded any great political returns and has cost the country billions and billions and billions of dollars. But Putin can't admit that he made a mistake. It would be horrible for him to say, okay, we haven't achieved what we thought we would. We're going back to where we were before. Dictators can't do that. They have to show that they are the strong all the time. Once you say I'm retreating, it shows you're weak, and then there's a chance you could get overthrown. So that's that over there. The Ukrainians have also started to use high tech to attack Russian bases far from where the battle lines are. They're reaching deep into Russia itself, into the Crimean Peninsula, using high-tech missiles and guidance systems to blow stuff up. They also have embarked on an assassination campaign to kill people who are what they call collaborators inside the occupied parts of the Ukraine. So it's not like they're just working on the front lines, they're working behind the front lines. So that's also an important thing to remember. So now let's come back to the war with Hamas. Check my watch here. I would say things are proceeding as we knew they would, which is that Israel is destroying the Gaza Strip. The civilian casualties, of course, are going up. The world's cameras are focused on the casualties, and the various world leaders are now asking for ceasefires and for Israel to stop killing civilians. And whereas the original attack, the massacre, happened on one day, Israel's military campaign is going on day after day, and the focus of the news reporters and the whole world is not what happened, weeks ago. And the longer it goes, the longer the time passes since the original attack by Hamas. And so the pressure on Israel is growing and growing and growing to do something. It's not clear that Israel had any kind of medium or long-term plan over what they would do. Mr. Netanyahu made a statement this week saying that Israel wants to stay in the Gaza Strip. And the world leaders, Mr. Biden, said, no, this is not what we signed up for. And we would much rather say that you said, look, that a new Palestinian government should take over Gaza, but not you yourself. So it looks like, that's a point of friction coming on. There have been several Israeli politicians who said, well, we're asking the world to take the Gazan people and give them asylum in their different countries. In other words, we will kick the Palestinians out of Gaza, and you take them as refugees in Germany, in Sweden, in England, in France, etc., etc., etc. Of course, the world leaders are saying to them, well, look, if you don't want them, why should we take them? And that type of thing. And we know who these people are, so we don't want to have more disruptions. We already have enough disruptions in our countries over these, the Arab-Israeli wars. We don't need a whole bunch more fuel to add to the fire. So, nobody really knows. I mean, I don't know, and people don't know what Israel's plans are for Gaza or to eliminate Hamas. I have an idea of what I think they might be trying, which is once they quote take over all of North Gaza, where they asked all the people to leave, and they've blown up all the tunnels, and they make sure that there's no hostages there. At that point, they're going to say the 2 million people who are now in South Gaza, everybody has to move to North Gaza. And then we're going to clean out South Gaza and get rid of the tunnels there and see if we can find the hostages there. So, of course, all of North Gaza is completely ruined. There is not a standing house to be seen. So, if they move the people to the north, it would be a way of saying, okay, now in stages, we've conquered all of Gaza. First, we did this north, then we're doing the south. Otherwise, once they finish securing the north, if they don't move the people, you have much more people concentrated everywhere. You saw people are sleeping in hospital yards and school yards and parking lots. They have nowhere to go. So how could Israel conquer South Gaza with even more people squashed in there than North Gaza, where they got rid of half of the people to start with? So Israel is in a bind. Netanyahu said we want to take over Hamas, take over Gaza Strip, and free the hostages. But tragically, and I don't know if this is true or not, the one hostage they said was killed by Israeli bombing, and they showed a picture of her alive when they caught her, and then they showed a picture of her dead body. Of course, they could have killed her and then just said, "Look at what you did." It's already clear, as Israel has long stated, that the Hamas is using hospitals and schools as military headquarters. Some of the films that Hamas has shown were shown to be fake. They were spliced together from all different sources. Hamas is not unsophisticated when it comes to use the media for its own aims. And of course, they have staged, in the past, they have staged kind of shootings and then brought the press to look at it. And then after the press takes pictures, all the guys who are shot, they just get up, wash off the fake blood and walk away. So it's happened. It has happened in the past. Doesn't mean it's happening now, but the world has to be very skeptical sometimes over what Hamas produces. And they always say, we can't verify these figures. There's nobody that they could interview. One thing that came out this week was that Israel tried to give diesel fuel to the hospital, and Hamas stole it. It's not easy to deliver something. You have to do it kind of carefully because you don't want to. You're still in a war, right? So they try to make this transfer by civilian operatives, and then when the oil got to the hospital, Hamas just took it. So they're not. This kind of thing is part and parcel of the warfare that goes on. It's not just military warfare, but it's also psychological warfare. It's media warfare, and in a certain way, Israel is on the back foot in all aspects of the war, except for the military part. And the non-military part is very important because the whole world nowadays gets to see everything. Needless to say, this war has had repercussions abroad. Anti-Semitism and anti-Israel demonstrations all over the place, pro-Palestinian ones everywhere. In London, they had an enormous pro-Palestinian demonstration with about 300,000 people there. And I don't know if any of you saw TV last night. Did you see? CNN did a series on anti-Semitism. They did a 1 hour special showing how anti-Semitism has grown since the Hamas war got started. And of course, we know I'm right here in Montreal. I was I go to the Y every day, the YMHA, and which is located right next to Herzliya High School. And there was a cop cars parked right in front of the high school to get 2 cops sitting in. So the threat is there. It's something that has sort of increased. And what this program showed was anti-Semitism has always been around. It's not a new invention. But the report that was made was the election of Trump in 2016 kind of allowed the right-wing anti-Semites to come out of the woods. And Trump refused to condemn them. And therefore, their movement just got stronger and stronger and stronger. The Palestinian war with Hamas has allowed the left-wing anti-Semites to come out of the woodwork and, to demonstrate and to use Israel as an excuse to be anti-Semitic. And, it's always a question of saying, well, if you criticize Israel, are you being anti-Semitic? And everybody says, no, that isn't the case. That you can certainly criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic. I mean, in Israel itself, more than half of the people are criticizing the government. And they're saying all kinds of bad things about the government, which it deserves. But that's not anti-Semitism. But to say, well, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's their slogan. So what does it mean? What's the actual meaning of that? Let's look at it. Let's just have a look here. Okay, sort of. So this is Palestine from 1920 to 1948 under British rule. This is Palestine. Here's Tel Aviv. Jaffa was the biggest Arab city. Here's Jerusalem. Over here somewhere like that. More like this, and like that. This is Haifa over here, the third biggest city in Israel. This is the Jordan River. And this is the Mediterranean Ocean right there. So today, the Gaza Strip is over here like this. And the West Bank, such as it is like that. This area is occupied by Israel, but it isn't been annexed by Israel. So if somebody says from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, here's the river, and here's the sea. So what's in between? It is all Palestine. But they're not saying we want a Palestinian state in the West Bank and the Gaza. What they're saying is that all of Palestine will be free, meaning what? It's free already. Israel is a democracy. People can vote. What they mean is that the Palestine should not be a Jewish state anymore. That either the Jews should get kicked out, or some. There isn't another suggestion. So when you say from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, what you're saying is you want all the Jews out of there, which is 7.5 million people. So it is an anti-Semitic statement to say that. It's not, it's a political statement, but it's also an anti-Semitic statement. What they're saying is we think that Israel should not exist as a Jewish state. But the United Nations in 1947 voted for a Jewish state in Palestine. It wasn't like the Jews took the land from the Arabs. The British had it in these years here. The United Nations voted to split Palestine into two states. An Arab state, which would have been, this would have been the Arab state here. Okay. Something like this. So this would have been the Arab state, A, and this would have been the Jewish state, J. A crossover point here, a crossover point over here. You can go like this, like this, like this. Jerusalem and Bethlehem would be international cities. That's what the UN proposed in 1947. But the Jewish side said, yes, we accept. The Arab side said, no, we don't accept. So then after they didn't accept it, when Israel became a state in May 1948, the Arabs invaded. They invaded from the north, they invaded from the northeast, they invaded from the east, they invaded from the south. And they lost. They lost. They lost this piece here, they lost this piece over here, and they lost all this piece over here. So that's how you end up with Gaza over here and the West Bank over here, which from 1948 to 1967, I mean, these places were not under Israeli control. So where was the demand for a Palestinian state in these years? They could have had one. The Israel didn't control this territory, and Israel didn't control this territory. So, to say that Israel has prevented a Palestinian state is something that is ignoring what real history is and what the facts are. And, most people, especially those college students that are running around demonstrating with Palestinian flags, I guarantee you, none of them know this. None of them. Now, the Palestinians themselves know it. They know it for sure. But what they say is, we don't want to look backwards, we only want to look forwards. And Yasser Arafat himself, he made a statement saying, we should have taken the 1947 deal. But you can't go backwards. You can't say, I now accept the 1947 deal. Hey, you fought 2 wars against Israel since then, or more than 2, but 2 where you lost territory. You're not going to just give it back. That's not how things work. So that's how we got to where we are, today. But you could say this, that all of these demonstrations show to Jewish people living abroad sort of who their friends are and who their enemies are. You kind of can get to identify them in that way. And we have lots of friends and we have lots of enemies. And, we could see that in statements and newspapers and all kinds of things like that. So it's, the program on TV, we're interviewing students at universities and asking them, are you afraid? Are you walking around being afraid? And a lot of them said, yes, we are. I don't know if the general public at large should feel that way. In other words, at least in the Western countries, there is a system of law and order. There is a police force. You know, individual acts of terrorism can happen, but it's not going to affect the entire community. But in universities where the sort of battle lines are more strongly drawn, I could definitely see students, you know, not feeling comfortable when you have a sea of Palestinian flags all over the place. Okay, so comments, questions, anything like that? Yeah, yes, for them.
The river to see how free and quote. It was General Master of May 1967. The comment said, from the river to the sea, Palestine is to be free of Jews.
No, I don't know that, and I didn't say, but Palestine shall be free. The question is, well, if you think about, well, what does it actually mean? It will be free, like, so. I mean, let's put it like this. Today, if you take all these people living over here, everybody, and let's pretend everybody was a citizen of a new state called Israel Palestine. Okay, as the Palestinians had wanted back in 1947, what they wanted was no partition. What they wanted was that Great Britain would give up this whole piece of territory. It would be called Palestine. It would be a democracy. And in those days, there were 2/3 of Arabs and 1/3 of Jews living in this whole piece of territory. And therefore, the Palestinians said, well, we're the majority in this land. Why should we carve it up and lose half of it when we're the ones who are the majority? So that was their argument. And this, from their point of view, it sort of makes sense, you know. But, you know, they didn't think of what the alternatives were. But today, assuming that you don't kick the Jews out of here, if Palestine is one state, the Jews would still be in a majority. So how would Palestine be free? Would that mean that Palestine is free if everybody's a citizen? Some of the people who say that slogan, what they claim is, some of them claim, well, what we don't mean is that we don't mean that this should become all a state of Palestine. What we mean is that all the Palestinians living in both Israel today and in the West Bank and Gaza, that these people shall be free. In other words, they won't be second-class citizens the way they are today. Okay, it's an argument, but that's not the same thing. It's not saying from the river to the sea, Palestinians will be free. They're saying Palestine will be free. It's a big difference between those two things, see? And like I said, the vast majority of people who are walking around with the flags, their perception is Palestinians are the underdogs. Palestinians are the non-white people, and we stick up for non-white people just like we stick up for blacks, Latinos, gays, etc., etc., etc. It's another harassed majority that we have to support. And that's the majority of non-Muslim, non-Arab people who are attracted to that slogan. That's kind of how they perceive it. And what they don't perceive is that, and they also perceive the Palestinians as being indigenous to this territory, and the white colonialist European Jews came to there to kick them out, just like the Australians came to suppress the indigenous people in Australia, the Aboriginals, just like they came in New Zealand and suppressed the Maoris, just like in America, the English and French came to suppress the indigenous peoples there. So what their model is simple, that the Palestinians are the natives and the Jews were the colonialists. That's how they see it. But of course, it's not the same. because the Jews were the original inhabitants of that place. Well, no, they weren't the original ones, but they're the surviving original ones. That if you go to the Israel Museum, you see all kinds of artifacts, of Hebrew artifacts, plus the Dead Sea Scrolls that were there long before the Arabs ever came there. So the claim that the Jews are indigenous to this territory is a valid claim, number one. Number two, half of the Jews who live here are themselves of Arab origin, meaning they came from Arab countries, and they are as dark-skinned as the Arabs are in general. So even the sort of racial component isn't a good fit for their model. And but you know, things get all exaggerated, and then the ends justify the means, and you have this idea of intersectionality, which means that if you support climate change, you have to support the Palestinians. If you support gays, you have to support the Palestinians. If you support blacks, you have to support the Palestinians. That idea of linking things together. Needless to say, in the Palestinian society, gays and transgenders and women are at the bottom of the barrel. They're not at all part of an equal society the way they are in Israel. So that's neither here nor there. Let's put it like that. Anybody else? Let's look around here. You have to speak louder. Bernie Sanders? Yeah, surprisingly, Bernie Sanders made a very strongly pro-Israel speech and statement. What? Yes, well, he's a senator. But he supported what the four of them said, but he made a very strongly pro-Israel statement when this massacre happened, and yeah, he didn't mince words. Yes, he's in favor of a ceasefire, of course, but the fact is that there are some people around who are saying that the Israelis deserved what they got on October the 7th. Some people are even saying that October the 7th didn't really happen, that this is all a kind of a fake news, invention of the Israelis to get sympathy. The thing is, the internet can multiply and exaggerate and then lead off into all kinds of crazy territory, because anybody can say anything and it gets published. Once it gets published, it can be resent, reposted, reused, and that's how things get around the world. The news that it wasn't the Israelis who bombed the hospital in the Al-Ahli hospital in Jabalia, that news is not not publicized. And the fact that Israelis bombed the hospital is still up there in all the different sites if you keep repeating it and looking for it. So, that's just a fact of life. That's a sign of our times. The longer this campaign goes on, the more support Israel is going to lose. It has to be. Can't be any other way. And the more radical members of the Israeli government, like one of them who said that one of them said, well, all we should do is just to drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza. So this is the extent of the right-wing and kind of racist feeling that a lot of the Israeli government members have on the right wing. And all that does is encourage Israelis, it encourages the countries that are supporting Israel to say, well, wait a minute, now there's two radical elements here. We should just not get involved or whatever, not support Israel anymore, because look at who is spokesman for the government. And so, this is an example of Israel shooting itself in the foot by allowing these things to go on. And also, in the West Bank, Israel is trying to control, what goes on there. They're trying to control the northern border here. And the settlers and the supporters of the right wing in Israel have taken this Hamas attack as a reason to take action against Palestinians who are living here. And, there have been so many cases of Palestinians being killed and their cars being burned and their olive trees being destroyed. And all of this gets on the media and all of this gets on TV. And all of this is another reason for the world to look at Israel and say, well, they're both bad. They're both two sides of a coin, two sides of a coin. So Israel is facing a media nightmare. Some of it is its own making, and some of it is just naturally what's going to happen when you're fighting a war. And you're the ones who have all the weapons and all the big weapons. And the other side doesn't have any weapons or very small ones. So naturally, the sympathy of the world is going to go to the underdog. And right now, Hamas is the underdog. So Israel has been told by Mr. Biden, finish this up fast, because the thread that you're hanging on is getting thinner and thinner. And, so Israel is stuck. They're stuck between two sides. And there's no easy way out for Israel at this point. There is some hope that they're negotiating over hostages, some hostages. But in order to get those hostages, Israel will have to release thousands of Palestinians from jail that Israel has them in. And then the whole cycle can start over again. Any other comments, questions? Let me see what it is. So, did you have something? But you have to speak a bit more. Right. Oh, you mean, well, the whole war of posters is one where, Israeli sympathizers put up posters of the hostages and those get torn down. So, no, you're talking about, but these posters is it paid advertising type of thing, or just like handmade posters that people slap up all over the place? Yeah, well, I mean, you're not allowed to put up posters in the metro or anywhere else. If you put them on the telephone pole, cat lost, dog lost, garage sale, they're supposed to be taken down. It's like I said, it's a media war. It's not just a war on the ground between the soldiers, it's a media war. And it's a war of public opinion. And unfortunately, people who don't know the facts can easily be seduced by the whole idea of David and Goliath, and the Arabs or the Gazans are the Davids, and the Israelis are the Goliaths. So Israel is caught in the tough spot, which they knew they would be caught in. They knew it in advance. Not only did they know it in advance, Hamas knew it in advance. Hamas never said, oh, you know what we're going to do? We're going to carry out this attack on Israel. We're going to kidnap soldiers. We're going to kill some civilians. And we know there's going to be a response. We know that the Israelis will come into Gaza and start to destroy. They didn't know how much. That's the part they didn't know. But they knew that was going to happen. And their aim was to try to inflame the Arab and Muslim world to attack Israel from all sides once Israel started to destroy Gaza. So there would be an attack from Lebanon, that the Palestinians in the West Bank and even in Israel themselves would rebel, and the whole Middle East would go up in flames. The end of the peace between Israel and the other Arab countries would happen, between Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, that Saudi Arabia would cut off ties with Israel. They've achieved half of what they expected to achieve. So, from that point of view, Hamas is definitely not losing in what they try to do. Their game plan is half been half successful. So, you know, they might have bit off more than they can chew, but that's something that's hard to say. Yes. No, it's not so. Bahrain, one of the countries that Israel signed the peace accord with, just removed their ambassador from Israel. Um, uh, Turkey, of course, removed their ambassador from Israel. The Saudis have appeared at an all-Arab meeting and said, you know, we support the Palestinians 100%. So no, it's impossible that Al Jazeera and other Arab news agencies that show the destruction in Gaza, it's impossible that that destruction doesn't affect the citizens of those countries. Say our government better not do anything to help Israel or to have relations with Israel. They could. They could survive that. It's impossible. I mean, you see it, you know, on TV every single day. You know, men crying and women crying and babies in the incubators that have no heat. I mean, how could a country like that, how could a host country, like say, I don't know what, Oman or another country, then say, oh, we're going to make relations with Israel. You know, the government wouldn't last a day. It's impossible. So no, the cost of Israel's actions in this campaign go far beyond the cost of the soldiers and the cost of the war. Obviously, Israel's economy is really in a downturn. Like I said before, I was looking just the other day, the shekel was around 4 to the dollar, where it was 3.27 to the dollar. You've got 500,000 people in Israel not working because they're either in the army or they've been evacuated from where they're living, from the border areas. Today, if you look at the papers, all the farmers can't pick all the crops that they've had because, you know, all the workers, Palestinians and the Thai people are all gone. And yes, there's a few volunteers that come in, but those volunteers can't keep coming in because if they're coming in to pick cabbages, well, what about the work they're supposed to be doing? So it's, you know, it definitely has an effect. And the longer the war goes on, the worse it's going to be for Israel. Let's put it like that. Okay, so listen. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. Yes, Jordan also recalled the ambassador. Egypt also. Egypt, well, Egypt is the one in a certain sense which is the most affected by this war because they're right on the border of Gaza. Because Israel has kind of asked Egypt, look, if we remove 1 million people from Gaza and put them in Sinai, you know, and we pay to set up 10 camps, and camps would you take them? And Egypt said, absolutely not, you know. Remember that any Arab leader who looks even neutral in this war, the public opinion on the street is very strongly against that. So they have to make sure they keep their jobs, and they can't be seen, you know, as being in any way sympathetic to Israel. The country which is now in the spotlight is Qatar, because Qatar is the country which has been sort of the main support of the Palestinians, especially in Gaza, especially in Hamas. And Qatar is now the country which has great relations with the United States. There is a military base of the US in Qatar. And they are right now the center of negotiations between Hamas and Israel. over the fate of the hostages. And Qatar is also the place where the money comes from to support Gaza, because Gaza has no economy. You know, the people are getting money from the UN relief agency. And besides the UN relief agency, Qatar is the only source of money going into the country. So, you know, that's why they're so important to this whole thing. And Qatar is one country, and the Arab countries did not want anything to do with Israel. So even though Israel was negotiating with Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and with the United Arab Emirates, Qatar was the one outlier, you know. So yeah. Well, I mean, no country wants to take them. It's not just like Egypt. Well, I mean, look, it's like, look, I mean, from the Palestinian point of view, they say, look, you kicked us out of our lands in 1948. Then you occupied land in 1967. What you want is to get rid of all Palestinians in the whole country. And we don't want to let you do that. So it's like ethnic cleansing. Well, I mean, let's put it like this. Accepting migrants has not been a popular political stand anywhere. I mean, Italy and France, they've had elections on this whole issue, and even in Great Britain, where they're trying to keep little boats away from Great Britain. So nothing to do with Palestinians, but to have waves of migrants like in the US coming in, no, there's nobody that wants it. And for sure, they're not going to want Palestinian migrants that have no money and have possibly terrorist connections. So for sure, you know, if it's Israel's problem to solve, the Arab countries are not going to solve it for Israel. That's for sure. Yes, over there. The Jewish what? Well, let's put it like this. You have to understand this, that of the people, there's 2 million people who live in this tiny little place that's 10 miles wide by about 30 miles long. Okay? 2/3 of the people who live there now are descendants of refugees that were either kicked out or moved out of Israel in 1947-48 when the war broke out. 1/3 were there all the time. They were the native Gaza people. Like I said, when 2005 happened, when the Israelis removed all their troops from Gaza and they removed all the settlements from Gaza, soon after, Hamas took over. And when Hamas took over, they said, our aim is to destroy Israel completely. Our aim isn't to have a Palestinian state in Gaza and West Bank. Our aim is to completely destroy Israel. So for that reason, Israel put a blockade all around Gaza. That blockade resulted in Gaza becoming the very poor, even poorer than it was before, because they can't get anything in, they can't get anything out. So that's what happens. You know, a lot of the Palestinians, you might see even in today's paper, there's an article in the New York Times, they say, listen, why start on October the 7th? October the 7th didn't happen all by itself. It happened as a result of what we were just mentioning before, that Israel has blockaded the Gaza Strip for so long, and people just, it has the highest unemployment in the world because, you know, there's no economy there. So therefore, what they're saying is, well, all these frustrations led to this attack. So what they're saying is, don't start on October 7th, go back to the whole, to what the Israelis were doing before. And my point would be fine, except that if you want to go back, let's go back to 1947 when they had a chance to have a state, and they didn't want it because they wanted all of Israel. So that would be my point. How far back do you want to go? I'm sorry. Well, the rockets, yeah, the rockets were coming from Gaza pretty well from the time Hamas took over. You know, that's why the Iron Dome system was invented, to shoot down those rockets. I think that the Western world, it's difficult for the Western world to understand the exact position that Israel is in. Because they don't have a hostile nation or hostile people on their borders who want to destroy them. You know, they can't see the sort of life or death choices that Israelis feel they have. That's the first. The second thing is that the massacre itself of 1,400 people, now reduced to 1,200 people, and the brutality of it. If any of these Western countries could extrapolate from that and say, okay, let's say France has 65 million people, which is 8 times Israel. So multiply 8 times 1,200, you get 10,000. You say to France, okay, imagine if somebody next door to you came in and murdered 10,000 people on one day, and the way they did it, how they were so proud of it. Well, what would you do in this situation? It's very hard for them to understand that. And that's what makes, you know, that's what makes the pictures of the babies in the hospital and the pictures of the destroyed buildings, that's what catches their attention. Yeah, well, you know, and you know, when you talk about proportionality, you say, well, okay, you know, how many Israelis have been killed and how many Palestinians have been killed? So, what does that mean? That Israel shouldn't shoot down the rockets that come to Israel. Therefore, there should be more Israeli casualties, and then you'd be satisfied. You know, well, what would you do if rockets were coming at you all the time? Would you say, oh, I want to have a lot of casualties, so that will give us the excuse to give casualties on their side? Or would you say, no, we have to defend our country by using our brains to shoot down these rockets? So that's why this idea of proportionality is not a fair idea. It's not a fair measure, because the intention of Hamas is to kill many more people, but Israel has prevented that from happening. Well, according to their plans, they wanted to take over the whole country, you know, that they could. You know. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. Taking your time to come, and it's my real pleasure to be here and to see you all in person again. Like I said at the beginning, COVID really had quite an effect, and I hope to see you on Zoom in February, and then you know I'll be back in person after Passover. So have a great winter. Thank you very much. Thank you on Zoom. People who are on Zoom, thank you very much for tuning in. And I hope that you continue to tune in the winter time. And thanks again to cote-saint-luc. Bye.